Welcome back, history fans. Today we uncover the truth behind Europe's most ruthless martial genius. When hearing the name Frederick the Great, you might picture a ruthless warrior with a heavy sword. But the reality is far more shocking. As a young prince, he was a fragile poet who loved French silk and art. How did a weeping artist transform into the most terrifying war machine of his entire century? The answer lies in a traumatic childhood, shaped by a cruel father who stripped the mercy from his soul. In the late 1720s, the Prussian court was a domain of iron and strict military order. Yet the crown prince of this nation was entirely different from what was expected of a king. Young Frederick was a fragile, slender boy who deeply rejected the brutal arts of war and horseback riding. Instead, he found solace in playing the silver flute, composing poetry, and reading philosophy. He preferred the refined touch of French silk garments over the heavy wool of strict military uniforms. To the profound shock of his generals, he openly admired the French Enlightenment philosophers. Records show he even wrote passionate letters to Voltaire, discussing grand art over military tactics. European aristocrats whispered and laughed behind closed doors, mocking the weakness of the Prussian heir. Foreign diplomats confidently reported that Prussia would crumble under this effeminate young prince. They believed the mighty army built by his ancestors would decay the moment he took the royal throne. Walking through the sunlit corridors of his grand palace, Frederick seemed detached from grim reality. He surrounded himself with talented musicians, staging concerts while ignoring matters of the state. The young man simply desired a life of cultural brilliance, far from the rigid demands of his royal blood. He envisioned a realm ruled by pure reason and beauty, not by the brutal force of heavy artillery. However, this peaceful illusion was a fragile glass castle, soon shattered by a terrifying nightmare. He was completely unaware of the dark, deadly storm gathering above him within the palace walls. The prince's sensitive nature was viewed as a dark disease by the one man holding absolute power. That man was his father, King Frederick William I, famously known across Europe as the Soldier King. The mighty king was a terrifying figure who ruled his family and nation with an iron fist. He was deeply disgusted by his son's artistic hobbies, viewing them as a betrayal of Prussian values. According to accounts, the king's profound disappointment quickly turned into a blind and violent dark rage. The peaceful sounds of the flute were soon replaced by the terrifying crack of the king's heavy wooden cane. Frederick endured brutal public punishments, shamed before the soldiers he was meant to command one day. The father was determined to strike the weakness from his son, using physical agony as his teaching tool. Every book of poetry discovered in the prince's room was thrown straight into the roaring fireplace. The young prince lived in constant terror, knowing that a single misstep could bring a savage punishment. His delicate hands, meant for playing music, were often bruised and battered from his father's relentless fury. This toxic environment slowly suffocated the dreamer, pushing him toward a reckless decision. Unable to endure the torture, he began to secretly plot a daring escape from his golden cage. Together with his closest friend and confidant, Hans Hermann von Katter, Frederick planned to flee to Great Britain. In the summer of 1730, the two men attempted to slip away under the dark cover of night. But their secret plan was discovered, and the furious, mighty king ordered their arrest for high treason. The punishment for abandoning the army was absolute, and the king showed no mercy to his own flesh. Frederick was stripped of his royal titles, thrown into a cold, damp cell in the grim fortress of Kustrin. Isolated deep in the darkness, the broken prince suffered a breakdown, waiting for his father's final judgment. The soldier king seriously considered ending his son's life to cleanse the royal bloodline of weakness. However, royalty intervened, warning the king that destroying the crown prince would ignite a massive scandal. Denied the chance to destroy his son, the enraged monarch decided to inflict a devastating punishment. He turned his wrath upon the prince's best friend, sentencing Carter to execution in the fortress courtyard. To inflict maximum mental torture, the king ordered Frederick to watch the dark execution of his best friend. On that freezing morning, guards dragged the desperate prince to the iron-barred window of his dark prison cell. Below in the courtyard, Carter stood calmly on the wooden scaffold, preparing to pay the price for loyalty. Frederick screamed through the heavy iron bars, begging for his friend's life with tears streaming down his pale face. "Please forgive me, my dear Carter," he cried out, his voice echoing tragically across the silent fortress. Carter looked up with a sad smile and replied, "There is nothing to forgive, my prince," before kneeling down. The heavy executioner's sword flashed in the morning light, and Frederick watched his dear friend meet a tragic end. The prince collapsed to the stone floor in pure agony, his fragile mind shattered by the devastating sight. Historical scholars agree that this exact moment destroyed the young boy who loved poetry and music. Days turned into weeks as Frederick sat in absolute silence, staring blankly at his dark prison walls. The fragile, weeping artist was dead, buried forever beneath the cold stones of that dark and tragic courtyard. In his place, a new entity was taking shape, forged in the fires of trauma and emotional suppression. To survive his father, Frederick learned the art of hiding his true self behind a thick mask of steel. He submitted to the king's will, adopting the rigid lifestyle he had once despised with all his heart. He memorized tactical manuals, studied logistics, and learned to command troops without emotion. His father, satisfied that the boy was finally broken, slowly restored his military ranks and titles. But behind those piercing blue eyes, the prince was calculating, absorbing the art of war like a lethal machine. He realized that to protect himself in a brutal world, he must become the most brutal mighty force. The flute was locked away in a dark wooden box, replaced by the heavy steel of a Prussian officer's sword. He transformed his deep emotional pain into a cold mathematical approach to absolute power. If you were broken by extreme cruelty, would you seek healing or become the very monster you hated? In 1740, the tyrannical soldier king died, and the throne passed to the 28-year-old prince. European courts rejoiced, believing the poet king would finally bring an era of peace and weakness. They expected him to dismantle the state and turn Prussia into a harmless realm of philosophy and arts. But their celebrations were abruptly cut short when the new king revealed his terrifying true nature. Frederick swiftly unleashed the mighty Prussian army, launching a devastating attack on Silesia. The monarchs who mocked him watched in horror as he systematically destroyed the Austrian forces. He applied the iron discipline of his father, but enhanced it with his brilliant, enlightened intellect. Frederick turned warfare into a deadly science, demanding absolute obedience from his loyal men. He famously stated that a soldier must fear his own officer far more than the enemy's deadly guns. This ruthless philosophy created an army that marched right into cannon fire without breaking the lines. The true test of his dark genius came during the grim 7 Years' War in 1757. Prussia was surrounded by enemies, facing destruction from France, Russia, and the mighty Austrian Empire. At the famous Battle of Leuthen, Frederick's exhausted forces faced 80,000 Austrian soldiers. Outnumbered nearly 3-1, any normal general would have ordered an immediate retreat. But Frederick remained icy cold, his emotionless eyes scanning the snowy field like a master of chess. Using the strict discipline he beat into his troops, he executed his famous Oblique Order maneuver. He deliberately shifted the bulk of his forces to strike the weakest point of the enemy's extended flank. The Prussian infantry marched in silence through the freezing snow, maintaining a perfect and terrifying line. When the command was given, their muskets fired with robotic speed, unleashing a devastating storm of lead. Because of their relentless training, Prussian soldiers could fire 3 volleys in the time it took others to fire 1. The Austrian flank collapsed under the heavy firepower, soldiers screaming in panic as the lines all broke. Crimson stained the pure white snow as Frederick's mighty cavalry relentlessly pursued the fleeing royal troops. Within a few tragic hours, the massive Austrian army was crushed, leaving thousands fallen upon the freezing mud. Frederick rode through the aftermath without a single flinch, his face a mask of icy stone and chilling calm. Is a leader's greatness measured by the battles he wins, or by the humanity sacrificed for victory? Leuthen was a tactical masterpiece, cementing his legend as the greatest commander of his generation. Even Napoleon visited Frederick's tomb, declaring if he were alive, the French would not be there. The weeping prince conquered Europe, but the cost of his glory was his own ability to feel empathy. His army functioned like a flawless clockwork machine, devoid of thought, driven only by relentless duty. He viewed his soldiers as mere numbers in an equation, spending their lives to expand the borders of his kingdom. The pure ideals he once cherished were weaponized to optimize the brutal efficiency of destruction. Throughout the endless wars, he carried a vial of poison, ready to choose a final escape on his terms. He trusted no one, believing human nature was depraved, selfish, and driven by dark, ultimate motives. The letters he wrote in his later years lacked hopeful poetry, filled only with bitter, cynical realism. His kingdom expanded into a European power built entirely upon a tragic sacrifice. The massive piles of fallen Austrian soldiers at Leuthen proved that the gentle poet was gone forever. Across the continent, European monarchs who once laughed at his silk garments now trembled in absolute fear. The man they called a weeping prince had become the grim reaper of 18th century European battlefields. He transformed the kingdom of Prussia into a terrifying, well-oiled machine of absolute and deadly war. He poured all of his intellectual brilliance into the ultimate goal of crushing his many enemies. The trauma inflicted by his father had forged an unbreakable sword of cold and calculating hard steel.
But this supreme military greatness on the field came at the ultimate cost of his own inner peace.
As passed, the glorious king grew increasingly isolated, locked deep inside his grand palace. His old friends were either dead on the battlefield or alienated by his cold, cynical nature. He once wrote that the more he saw of human beings, the more he loved the silent company of his loyal dogs. At the summer palace of Sanssouci, the aging monarch wandered through the fallen autumn leaves alone. His frail body was broken, posture deeply hunched, wearing a faded military coat stained with dark snuff powder. The very only living creatures he truly trusted were his loyal pack of elegant Italian greyhounds. He demanded to be buried beside his beloved dogs on the terrace, rejecting royal grand tombs. This final wish reflected his profound disgust for the cruel human world that had tortured him since his sad birth. The silver flute he once loved so passionately remained locked away, gathering dust in the cold dark. It remained a haunting reminder of the gentle artistic soul silenced by his cruel father. Frederick the Great proved that a dreamer's tears, when totally crushed by violence, forge the sharpest weapons. His terrifying legacy fundamentally altered the course of history and modern warfare. The brutal Prussian military tradition he established led to the dark global wars of the future. He was widely hailed as an enlightened ruler, yet his entire reign was defined by brutal conquest. Modern historians still debate the true hidden nature of the broken man beneath the uniform. Was he a true brilliant genius who saved his nation, or a victim who burned the world in dark revenge? Behind the glorious victories and the brilliant strategies, there remained only a hollow shell. He sacrificed his capacity for pure love and joy to protect himself from a world he despised. Walking slowly with his wooden cane, the legendary warrior king looked nothing like a victor. He was a tragic prisoner of his own success, trapped forever inside the heavy iron armor. The ghost of Carter's tragic end haunted his silent, dark nights, a permanent scar on his deeply wounded mind. Every cannon fired and enemy vanquished was a reaction to his helpless childhood terror. The irony of his life is that he hated the Soldier King, yet he became the ultimate soldier. His story remains one of history's most tragic examples of cruelty breeding supreme greatness. He leaves behind a chilling question about the heavy, unseen price paid for historical glory. Frederick's military genius built an empire, but it cost him his entire soul and human compassion. Do you believe his greatness was worth the torment, or was he a broken man leading a nation? Tell us below. If you enjoyed this dark historical dive, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel for more.